This first-class ticket doesn't match you.
Derek Morrison's words hung in the air like a challenge, his pale blue eyes scanning Maya Blackwood from head to toe with undisguised skepticism. Behind him, the departure board at Chicago O'Hare's Terminal C flickered with the familiar chaos of delayed flights and gate changes, but Derek's attention was laser-focused on the woman standing before his desk. Before we dive into this story that will absolutely shock you, I need to know something. Where are you watching from right now? Drop your city in the comments below. And if you believe that respect shouldn't depend on what you wear or how you look, hit that subscribe button because this story is going to change how you think about power, dignity, and justice forever. Maya Blackwood stood perfectly still, her dark brown eyes meeting Derek's gaze without flinching. At 34, she had learned to read people like financial reports, and Derek Morrison was an open book of prejudice and petty authority. What Derek couldn't read, what none of them could see, was the truth standing right in front of them. Maya Blackwood wasn't just any passenger holding a first-class ticket to Miami. She was the CEO of Blackwood Industries, a logistics and transportation empire worth $2.8 billion. More importantly, she was the majority shareholder of Airlines, the very company that employed Derek Morrison, and in exactly 9 minutes his career was going to be over. But Derek didn't know that. All he saw was a black woman in her early 30s wearing a charcoal gray cashmere tracksuit that cost more than his monthly salary. Her natural hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, no makeup, no jewelry except for a sleek black ceramic watch. To Derek, she looked like someone trying to punch above her weight class. There's obviously been some kind of mistake. Derek continued, his voice carrying just enough volume to draw attention from other passengers in line. The system is showing irregularities with your booking. Maya had been expecting this. For the past 6 months, her corporate compliance team had been receiving anonymous reports about discriminatory practices at various Airlines locations. Passengers of color being mysteriously downgraded to computer glitches that seemed to disproportionately affect certain demographics gate agents who somehow couldn't find reservations that were clearly valid. So when she'd finished her 3-day marathon of acquisition meetings in Chicago, successfully closing a $500 million deal that would expand her company's reach into international shipping, Maya had made a deliberate choice. Instead of taking her private jet home to Miami, instead of wearing one of her signature power suits, instead of traveling with her usual entourage of assistants and security, she'd bought a first-class ticket on Airlines under her own name and dressed down. She wanted to see for herself what her employees were really doing when they thought nobody important was watching. "What exactly is irregular about my booking?" Maya asked, her voice calm and measured. She pulled out her phone not to check her ticket, but to subtly start a voice recording. "I purchased this ticket 3 weeks ago through your website. Confirmation number Sky 7749BB, seat 2A. Derek's fingers flew across his keyboard with theatrical urgency. "Well, that's exactly the problem. Seat 2A is a premium bulkhead seat and the system is flagging it for verification. Corporate policy requires additional authentication for certain passengers. The words came out quietly, but they carried an edge that made Derek shift uncomfortably behind his desk. Maya stepped closer, close enough to read his name tag, close enough to see the slight tremor in his hands as he continued typing. "People trying to use tickets that might not be legitimate," Derek said, not meeting her eyes. "We've had issues with fraudulent bookings lately." That was when Maya heard the distinctive sound of a phone camera starting to record. She glanced to her left and saw a young Hispanic woman, probably in her mid-20s, holding up her smartphone with a look of growing outrage on her face. "Excuse me," the woman said, stepping forward. "I'm Jessica Morales, and I run a travel blog with 500,000 followers. Did you just imply that this woman's ticket isn't legitimate because of how she looks?" Derek's face flushed red. "Ma'am, I didn't say anything about how anyone looks. I'm following standard security protocols." "Standard protocols." Jessica's voice rose slightly as she kept recording. "I literally just watched you wave through 3 white passengers without checking their authentication or talking about fraudulent bookings." Y'all, this is happening right now at O'Hare Airport and I'm going live. Maya watched Jessica's fingers move across her phone screen, saw the small red dot appear indicating a live stream. Within seconds, a handful of viewers had joined, then dozens, then hundreds. The power of social media in action. "Ma'am?" Derek said to Jessica, his voice taking on a pleading tone. "I'm going to need you to stop recording. This is a private customer service matter." "Actually," Maya interjected, her voice still calm, "this is a public space and she has every right to record. What she doesn't have the right to do is watch you discriminate against paying customers without speaking up." "Thank you, Jessica." Jessica's eyes widened slightly. There was something about Maya's tone, something about the way she commanded the space around her that suggested this wasn't just any passenger having trouble with a gate agent. Derek seemed to sense it too. He cleared his throat and tried to regain control of the situation. "Look, I'm trying to resolve this quickly and efficiently, but first-class seats are reserved for our premium customers, and when someone doesn't, when the booking seems unusual, when someone doesn't look like they belong in first class," Maya finished for him. The gate area had grown quieter. Other passengers were starting to pay attention, some pulling out their own phones, others simply watching with the uncomfortable fascination that comes with witnessing obvious injustice. Derek's computer beeped and his face went from red to pale as he stared at his screen. Maya couldn't see what he was looking at, but she could guess. Her executive assistant, Elena Rodriguez, had been monitoring all of Maya's travel plans from the corporate office in Miami. By now, Elena would have noticed that Maya's flight was approaching boarding time without any check-in confirmation. She would be making calls. "Sir," Maya said, pulling out her own phone, "I'm going to call my assistant to help resolve this situation. Her name is Elena Rodriguez, and she handles my corporate travel arrangements." "Your corporate travel?" Derek asked, a new note of uncertainty creeping into his voice. "That's right. Elena, it's Maya. I'm at gate C47 with an agent named Derek Morrison who seems to think my first-class ticket is fraudulent. Could you please call Skyline Airlines customer service and confirm my reservation?" "Yes, I'll hold." Maya put the phone on speaker, letting Derek and the growing crowd of onlookers hear the hold music. Jessica was narrating quietly into her phone, her viewer count climbing steadily as she described what was happening. "Folks, I've been traveling for years, and I've never seen anything like this. This woman has been nothing but polite and professional, and this gate agent is treating her like she stole her ticket. We're up to 800 viewers now, and the comments are, wow. People are angry." Derek was typing frantically on his computer, probably trying to figure out what to do next. That's when his supervisor, a middle-aged white man with a nervous disposition, appeared at his shoulder. "Derek, what's the holdup? We need to start boarding. Tom, there's an issue with this passenger's ticket. I'm trying to verify." "Ma'am," Tom interrupted, looking at Maya. "I apologize for the delay. I'm Tom Richardson, the gate supervisor." What seems to be the problem? Maya looked at Tom with the same calm expression she'd maintained throughout the entire encounter. "The problem, Mr. Richardson, is that your employee has decided my first-class ticket is fraudulent, because I don't look like his idea of a first-class passenger. He's refused to honor my confirmed reservation, and he suggested that I'm involved in some kind of booking scam." Tom's eyes darted between Maya, Derek, Jessica's still recording phone, and the crowd of increasingly interested passengers. He could see this situation spiraling out of control. "Derek, just process the boarding pass," he said quietly. But the system process, the boarding pass. Derek's hands shook slightly as he reached for Maya's ticket. That's when Elena's voice came through the phone, clear and professional. "Maya, I have Skyline Airlines customer service on the line. They've confirmed your reservation for flight 447 Seat 2A purchased on October 15th for $2,847. The ticket is valid, and the payment was processed successfully 3 weeks ago. Is there anything else you need me to clarify?" Derek's face went completely white. Tom stepped closer to the computer screen, his own expression shifting from annoyance to concern. "Elena, Could you also check if there have been any other reports of booking irregularities with Skyline Airlines lately? Actually, yes. Our legal department has been tracking several complaints about discriminatory practices, particularly involving passengers of color being downgraded or denied service despite valid tickets. Would you like me to connect you with our legal team? Derek dropped Maya's ticket. Tom's mouth fell open slightly. Jessica's viewer count had climbed over 2,000, and the comment section was exploding with outrage and demands for justice. Who are you?" Derek whispered. Maya smiled for the first time since approaching his desk. It wasn't a warm smile. "Derek Morrison," she said, her voice carrying a new authority that made everyone in the immediate area fall silent. "You just made the biggest mistake of your career. People like you always try to game the system." Derek's voice cracked slightly as he said it, but there was no taking the words back. They hung in the air like an accusation, raw and ugly and undeniable. The entire gate area seemed to freeze dozens of passengers turning to stare at the unfolding confrontation. Maya Blackwood tilted her head slightly, her expression shifting from calm professionalism to something sharper, more dangerous. "People like me, Derek. I want you to finish that thought. Tell everyone exactly what you mean by people like me." Jessica Morales' phone was still recording her viewer count climbing past 5,000. "Oh my God," she whispered into the camera. "Did he just say what I think he said? This is getting ugly fast." Tom Richardson, the gate supervisor, looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. "Derek, maybe we should know." Maya interrupted, her voice cutting through Tom's nervous stammering like a blade. "Let Derek explain himself. I'm genuinely curious about what kind of people he thinks try to game the system." Derek's face had gone from pale to flushed sweat beading on his forehead despite the airport's aggressive air conditioning. He could see the phone's recording, could hear the angry murmurs from passengers, but his pride and prejudice had backed him into a corner he couldn't escape from gracefully. "Look, I deal with this stuff every day," he said, his voice getting louder as he tried to justify himself. "People show up with tickets they can't afford, claiming they paid full price when it's obvious they're not." He gestured vaguely at Maya's casual outfit. "I mean, look at yourself. You're wearing a tracksuit to board a first-class flight." "A $6,000 Brunello Cucinelli tracksuit," Maya said quietly, "but I suppose you wouldn't recognize quality if it wasn't covered in logos." The murmurs from the crowd grew louder. A white business executive in an expensive suit stepped forward. "Excuse me," I couldn't help but overhear. "Did this man just profile this woman based on her clothing?" "That's exactly what he did," said another passenger, a Hispanic man with 2 young children. "My kids are watching this. What am I supposed to tell them about how people treat each other?" Derek was drowning, and he knew it. But instead of backing down, he doubled down. "I'm not profiling anyone. I'm doing my job. We have protocols for suspicious bookings, and when someone shows up looking like—" He caught himself before finishing the sentence, but the damage was done. "Looking like what Derek?" Maya asked, taking a step closer to his desk. "Looking black. Is that what you were going to say?" Tom Richardson finally found his voice. Derek stopped talking, right now. But Derek was past the point of rational thought. The pressure, the phones, the crowd, Maya's unnervingly calm authority, it was all too much. "You know what? Yes? Fine. We get people all the time who try to scam their way into first class, and 9 times out of 10 they look exactly like you. So, excuse me for being cautious." The gate area exploded. Passengers began shouting over each other, some defending Derek, most expressing outrage. Jessica's live stream was chaos, comments flooding in faster than anyone could read them. "This is unbelievable," Jessica said into her phone, her voice shaking with anger. "We're at nearly 10,000 viewers now, and this man just admitted to racial profiling on camera. Chicago O'Hare Skyline Airlines Gate C-47. Share this everywhere." Maya stood in the center of the storm, perfectly calm, perfectly controlled. She pulled out her phone again and speed-dialed a number. "Elena, it's time to initiate Protocol 7. Derek and Tom exchanged confused looks. Protocol 7 meant nothing to them, but to Elena Rodriguez, sitting in Blackwood Industries' executive offices 37 floors above downtown Miami, it meant everything. It meant her boss was being discriminated against, and it meant the full weight of a multi-billion-dollar corporation was about to come crashing down on whoever was responsible. Initiating Protocol 7. Elena's voice came through the phone clear and professional. Legal is standing by, compliance is monitoring, and I'm connecting to corporate command. Maya, are you safe? I'm safe, Elena, but Skyline Airlines has a problem, a big one. Derek was staring at Maya like she'd just sprouted wings. Protocol 7, corporate command. Who the hell are you? Maya ignored him. Elena, Derek Morrison at gate C-47 just admitted on camera that he racially profiles passengers. His exact words were that people who try to scam first class 9 times out of 10 look exactly like me. We have multiple witnesses and live stream documentation. Documented. Elena's voice was ice cold now. Maya, I'm showing that Mr. Morrison has worked for Skyline Airlines for 6 years. Should I pull his employment record, please do? And Elena, check for any previous complaints. Derek's hands were visibly shaking now. Tom looked sick. The crowd of passengers had grown larger, more angry, more vocal. Airport security was beginning to take notice. Maya, Elena's voice came back. Derek Morrison has had 14 formal complaints filed against him in the past 2 years. 7 were for discriminatory behavior towards passengers of color. 3 were for inappropriate comments. The rest were general professionalism issues. All were marked as resolved through counseling. The words hit Derek like physical blows. 14 complaints, 7 for discrimination. And now it was all being broadcast live to thousands of people. There's more, Elena continued. I'm cross-referencing with our legal department's ongoing investigation. Mr. Morrison's name appears on our watch list for employees exhibiting patterns of discriminatory behavior. Tom Richardson grabbed Derek's arm. We need to go, now. But Maya wasn't finished. Elena, what's the status on the seat reassignment Derek mentioned? My seat 2, A checking now. Maya, this is interesting. Seat 2A was reassigned 47 minutes ago to a passenger named Brandon Whitmore. The reassignment was processed by Derek Morrison with a notation of original passenger no-show. But you're clearly here and you never canceled your reservation. Derek's face went from red to gray. That's a computer error. The system doesn't lie, Derek. Maya said, her voice carrying a new edge. But people do. You gave my seat away, didn't you, to someone who looks more like your idea of a first-class passenger? The crowd was getting angrier. Jessica's viewer count had climbed past 15,000. Other passengers were pulling out their phones, adding their own recordings to the digital documentation of Derek's downfall. Where's Brandon Whitmore now? Maya asked Elena. He checked in at this gate 38 minutes ago and proceeded directly to the aircraft. Maya, I'm also showing that Mr. Whitmore's ticket was originally for economy seat 23B. The upgrade to 2A was processed as a customer service courtesy by Derek Morrison. Tom Richardson looked like he was going to be sick. Derek, please tell me you didn't. I didn't do anything wrong. Derek shouted, his voice cracking. Brandon's father is a senator. He called the airport directly. I was told to accommodate him, told by whom Maya asked. Derek's mouth opened and closed like a fish. He realized he'd just confessed to giving away a paying customer's seat because of political pressure. Elena, Maya said into her phone, please add fraudulent seat reassignment and corruption to Mr. Morrison's file. Also, I want a full investigation into any payments or favors exchanged for seat upgrades. Already in progress, Maya. I've also notified Skyline's corporate headquarters and they're sending a crisis management team to the airport immediately. Derek collapsed into his chair, his head in his hands. 6 years of employment, a career in the airline industry, his reputation, it was all crumbling in real-time broadcast live to an audience that was growing by the minute. You people always play the race card, he muttered, barely audible. But Maya heard it, Jessica heard it, the passengers heard it, and most importantly, the thousands of people watching the live stream heard it. Did he just say you people? Jessica said into her camera, her voice incredulous. Sir, you are done. You are so incredibly done. The crowd erupted again. Several passengers were now filming, creating a digital record from multiple angles. Airport security was finally arriving, looking confused by the chaos. Maya looked at Derek with something that might have been pity. "Derek Morrison, you have no idea what you've just done. Not just to me, but to yourself, to your company, and to every person of color who will ever try to fly on Skyline Airlines again." She turned to Tom Richardson. "Mr. Richardson, I want to speak with whoever is in charge of this aircraft immediately. The captain, the lead flight attendant, whoever has authority to resolve this situation before it gets even worse." Tom nodded frantically. "Yes, ma'am, absolutely." "Let me call ahead, and don't call ahead," Maya interrupted. "I want to speak with them face to face, on the plane, where my seat is currently occupied by someone who didn't pay for it." She picked up her carry-on bag, a simple black leather piece that probably cost more than Derek's car, and started walking toward the jet bridge. "Elena," she said into her phone, "I'm boarding the aircraft now. Are you monitoring the situation?" "Every second, Maya. Legal is standing by, compliance is documenting everything, and I've initiated media monitoring protocols. This is already trending on 3 social platforms." Derek watched Maya walk away, the weight of his destroyed career settling on his shoulders like a lead blanket. Behind him, Tom was frantically making phone calls to corporate headquarters, trying to get ahead of a scandal that was already spiraling beyond anyone's control. Jessica followed Maya toward the jet bridge, still live streaming. "Folks, she's heading to the plane now. I don't know who this woman is, but she just completely destroyed that racist gate agent. I'm going to try to follow and see what happens next." As Maya approached the aircraft door, she could hear the normal sounds of passengers settling and flight attendants making their preparations, the routine chaos of a plane preparing for departure. What they didn't know was that their routine was about to be shattered by a woman who owned the airline they worked for, who had just been subjected to the kind of discrimination that would cost careers, trigger investigations, and change corporate policies forever. Derek Morrison's 9-year career with Skyline Airlines was over. He just didn't know it yet. But Maya Blackwood did, and she was just getting started. "Economy is where you belong, honey." The words dripped from Victoria Ashworth's lips like poisoned honey, her cultured accent making the insult sound almost elegant. She stood in the first-class galley of Skyline Airlines Flight 447, her emerald silk blouse perfectly tailored to complement her striking green eyes, her black pencil skirt hugging curves that she'd carefully maintained through years of yoga and personal training. At 42, Victoria was the kind of woman who commanded attention wherever she went, and she knew it. Maya Blackwood had just stepped through the aircraft door when she heard those words delivered with the casual cruelty that only someone truly comfortable with their prejudices could manage. Victoria was leaning against the galley counter, speaking in low, conspiratorial tones with a young white man who was lounging comfortably in seat 2, Maya's seat. "And you're sure they won't find out?" the young man was asking, swirling a glass of pre-departure champagne. This had to be Brandon Whitmore, the senator's son, who had somehow acquired Maya's first-class seat through Derek Morrison's creative interpretation of customer service. Victoria's laugh was crystalline and cold. "Oh, please, she's probably some assistant who got hold of her boss's credit card. Happens all the time. These people think they can fake their way into first class, but it's obvious when someone doesn't belong." Maya stood perfectly still, letting Victoria's words wash over her like confirmation of everything she'd suspected about the culture at her own airline. Behind her, she could hear Jessica Morales still live-streaming, her voice barely contained with outrage. "Folks, I'm on the plane now, and the lead flight attendant, her name tag says Victoria, just said that economy is where this woman belongs. This is insane. We're up to 22,000 viewers and climbing." Victoria turned toward the aircraft door, her professional smile snapping into place like a mask. But when she saw Maya, the smile faltered for just a moment. There was something about the way Maya carried herself, the quiet confidence in her posture, the expensive simplicity of her outfit that didn't match Victoria's preconceptions about who belonged in her first-class cabin. "Can I help you, Miss Victoria?" asked her tone, suggesting she very much doubted it. Maya walked slowly down the aisle, taking in the details of the cabin she technically owned. The leather seats that her company had paid to upgrade, the mood lighting that her design team had selected. the galley equipment that bore the Blackwood Industries logo in small, discreet lettering. "Yes," Maya said quietly, stopping directly in front of Brandon Whitmore. "You're in my seat." Brandon looked up from his champagne with the lazy arrogance that only comes with a lifetime of privilege. "Sorry, what this is 2A. My seat." Maya pulled out her boarding pass and held it where both Brandon and Victoria could see it clearly. "This is my boarding pass for seat 2A, purchased 3 weeks ago for $2,847. I believe there's been a mistake." Victoria stepped between them, her emerald eyes flashing with annoyance. "Sir, please don't let her intimidate you. Some people try to cause scenes to get upgraded, but we don't negotiate with disruptive passengers." "Disruptive." Maya repeated, her voice still calm. "I haven't raised my voice. I haven't made any demands. I simply stated that someone is sitting in the seat I paid for." Behind them, more passengers were boarding, many of them slowing down to watch the unfolding confrontation. Carlos Rivera, a 29-year-old flight attendant with warm brown eyes and an uncomfortable expression, approached from the rear galley. "Victoria," he said quietly, "maybe we should check the manifest, Carlos." "Please don't interfere," Victoria cut him off sharply. "This is a first-class matter and you're assigned to economy." Carlos flinched at the dismissal, but Maya caught the look of recognition in his eyes. He knew something wasn't right, but he also knew better than to challenge Victoria's authority in front of passengers. "Ma'am," Victoria continued, turning back to Maya with exaggerated patience, "I'm going to need to see your identification along with your boarding pass. We've had issues with fraudulent documents lately." Maya reached into her bag and pulled out her driver's license, handing it to Victoria with the same calm composure she'd maintained since boarding the plane. Victoria glanced at the ID, then looked back at Maya with narrowed eyes. "Maya Blackwood," she read aloud. "And you're claiming this first-class ticket is legitimate." "I'm not claiming anything," Maya replied. "I'm stating facts. That's my seat, that's my boarding pass, and this young man needs to move." Brandon finally spoke up, his voice carrying the entitled whine of someone who'd never been told no in his entire life. "Look, lady, I don't know what your deal is, but my dad called ahead and arranged for me to have this seat. Maybe check with the gate agent if you think there's been some mix-up. Your father called ahead." Maya asked, her voice dangerously quiet. "Yeah, Senator Whitmore. He has a direct line to airline management. So maybe don't try to cause trouble for people who actually matter." The words landed like a slap, and Maya felt something cold and sharp settle in her chest. Behind her, she could hear Jessica's sharp intake of breath, still broadcasting the confrontation to an audience that was approaching 30,000 viewers. Victoria stepped closer, her voice dropping to a whisper that she probably thought sounded intimidating. "Miss Blackwood, I'm going to give you one opportunity to avoid making this unpleasant for everyone. Take your bag, walk back to economy, and find an empty seat. If there isn't one, we'll arrange for you to be rebooked on a later flight." "Rebooked?" Maya's eyebrows rose slightly. "On a flight I've already paid for to a seat I've already been assigned." "Sometimes these things happen," Victoria said with a shrug, "especially when passengers try to stretch the truth about their booking status." Carlos Rivera had been listening to the entire exchange, and Maya could see him struggling with his conscience. He stepped forward again, his voice barely above a whisper. "Victoria, I really think we should verify the reservation. Her name is on the manifest for 2A. I checked when I was reviewing the passenger list." Victoria turned on Carlos with a fury that made several nearby passengers take a step back. "Carlos Rivera, you are out of line. This is not your section. This is not your responsibility, and if you don't return to your assigned duties immediately, I'll write you up for insubordination." Carlos's face went pale, but he stood his ground. "Ma'am, with respect, we're supposed to honor confirmed reservations, and if there's been an error, the only error." Victoria snapped, her voice loud enough now to draw attention from passengers throughout the first-class cabin, was letting certain people think they could fake their way into premium seating. The words hung in the air like an accusation. Several passengers were now openly staring their phones out, recording the confrontation. A middle-aged white woman in 3B leaned forward, her voice cutting through the tension. Excuse me, did you just suggest that this woman faked her ticket? I'm suggesting, Victoria replied, her composure finally cracking slightly, that we have protocols for verifying suspicious bookings, especially when passengers don't fit the typical first-class demographic. Jennifer Thompson, the business executive in 3B, stood up completely. The typical first-class demographic. What exactly does that mean? Victoria realized she'd gone too far, but pride and prejudice had taken over rational thought. It means, she said, gesturing vaguely at Maya, passengers who clearly belong in premium cabins versus those who don't. Maya had been silent through this exchange, letting Victoria dig her own grave with every word. But now she pulled out her phone and dialed a number that Victoria Ashworth would soon recognize as the sound of her career ending. Elena Maya said, her voice carrying clearly through the first-class cabin. I'm on the aircraft now. We have a situation with the lead flight attendant. Her name is Victoria Ashworth, and she's refused to honor my confirmed reservation because, in her words, I don't fit the typical first-class demographic. Victoria's face went white. There was something about Maya's tone, something about the way the other passengers were now watching, that suggested this phone call was going to be more significant than a simple customer complaint. Elena, could you please call Captain Hayes to the first-class cabin? Yes, immediately. And Elena, start recording this conversation. We're going to need documentation. Recording initiated, came Elena's voice through the phone speaker, clear and professional. Maya, I show that Flight 447 was scheduled to depart 12 minutes ago. Are they holding the flight they're about to? Maya replied, her eyes never leaving Victoria's increasingly pale face. Victoria, I'd like you to meet Elena Rodriguez, my executive assistant. Elena, could you explain to Miss Ashworth exactly who she's been speaking to? Elena's voice was ice-cold now. Miss Ashworth, you've just denied service to Maya Blackwood, CEO of Blackwood Industries and majority shareholder of Skyline Airlines. You currently work for her. Victoria's champagne glass would have shattered on the cabin floor if Brandon hadn't caught it. The blood drained from her face so quickly that Carlos stepped forward, concerned she might faint. That's impossible, Victoria whispered. Maya smiled for the first time since boarding the aircraft. It wasn't a pleasant smile. Victoria Ashworth. She said, her voice carrying a new authority that made every passenger in first class lean forward to listen. You've just made the second biggest mistake of your career. The biggest one is about to be how you handle the next 60 seconds. I'm calling security to remove you from this aircraft. Victoria Ashworth's voice shook with a mixture of fear and desperate authority as she reached for the cabin phone, her emerald eyes blazing with the kind of fury that comes from being cornered by your own prejudices. Her perfectly manicured fingers trembled slightly as she lifted the handset, but there was no backing down now. Elena Maya said calmly into her phone, "Did you hear that Miss Ashworth is calling security to remove the owner of the airline from her own plane?" Recorded and documented, Elena's voice came through crystal clear, now audible to everyone in the first-class cabin. "Maya, should I conference in legal now?" "Not yet," Maya replied, her dark eyes never leaving Victoria's increasingly panicked face. "Let's see how deep Miss Ashworth wants to dig this hole." Brandon Whitmore had gone completely silent, his senator father's political connections suddenly seeming much less powerful in the face of actual corporate ownership. Carlos Rivera stood frozen between the galley and the aisle, watching his supervisor destroy her career in real time while passengers filmed every word. "You're bluffing," Victoria said into the cabin phone, though her voice lacked conviction. "Flight deck, this is Victoria. I need security in the first-class cabin immediately. We have a passenger who's refusing to accept her seat assignment and making false claims about Victoria. Stop talking. Right now." The command came from behind Maya, delivered in the crisp, authoritative tone of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. Captain Robert Hayes stood in the aircraft doorway. His silver hair perfectly groomed his pilot's uniform, bearing the kind of military precision that came from 30 years of flying commercial aircraft. At 58, Captain Hayes had seen everything the airline industry could throw at him: emergency landings, unruly passengers, equipment failures, corporate mergers and management changes. What he hadn't expected was to find his lead flight attendant calling security on the woman who owned the company he worked for. "Captain Hayes," Maya said, turning toward him with the same calm composure she'd maintained throughout the entire confrontation. "I'm Maya Blackwood. I believe we need to have a conversation." Robert Hayes had been flying for Skyline Airlines for 12 years, ever since the company had acquired his previous employer in a corporate merger. He'd seen Maya Blackwood's name on corporate communications, had read about her in industry publications, had even seen her photo in the company newsletter when she'd announced the latest expansion into international shipping routes. What he'd never expected was to find her standing in his first-class cabin dressed in casual wear, being threatened with removal by his own crew. "Miss Blackwood," he said, his voice carefully controlled. "I apologize for any confusion. How can I help resolve this situation?" Victoria's face went from pale to gray. "Captain, you can't seriously believe Victoria. You will not speak unless I ask you a direct question." Captain Hayes cut her off sharply. "Miss Blackwood, would you mind explaining what's happened here?" Maya gestured towards Brandon Whitmore, still occupying her seat with decreasing comfort. "I have a confirmed reservation for seat 2A purchased 3 weeks ago for full fare. When I arrived at the gate, Derek Morrison gave my seat to Mr. Whitmore here, whose father apparently called to request special treatment. When I boarded the aircraft, Miss Ashworth informed me that economy is where I belong, and refused to honor my confirmed reservation." Captain Hayes looked at Victoria with the kind of disappointment that can end careers. "Is this accurate?" Victoria's voice was barely a whisper. The passenger seemed suspicious. "Her booking appeared irregular, and we have protocols for what exactly appeared irregular about a first-class ticket purchased 3 weeks in advance by someone whose name appears on our corporate organizational chart as the majority shareholder." The question landed like a physical blow. Victoria had no answer because there was no answer. Maya's booking hadn't been irregular. Her ticket hadn't been suspicious. The only thing Victoria had found objectionable was Maya's appearance, her casual clothes, her natural hair, her black skin. Jessica Morales, still live streaming from the boarding area behind them, was barely containing her excitement. "Folks, the captain just confirmed it. This woman actually owns the airline. We're at 47,000 viewers now, and this story is exploding across social media." Elena Maya said into her phone, "Could you please provide Captain Hayes with the details of my travel arrangements?" "Certainly. Captain Hayes, Maya Blackwood is traveling under reservation Sky, 7,749 BB, purchased on October 15th for seat 2A at a cost of $2,847. The ticket is valid, the payment was processed successfully, and there have been no changes or cancellations to the reservation. Miss Blackwood is indeed the CEO of Blackwood Industries and holds a 62% ownership stake in Skyline Airlines." Captain Hayes closed his eyes briefly, the weight of the situation settling on his shoulders. "Mr. Whitmore, I'm going to need you to move to your originally assigned seat immediately. Now, wait just a minute." Brandon protested, his privileged upbringing finally reasserting itself. "My father specifically called ahead. I was told this would be handled as a courtesy upgrade." "Your father called to request special treatment," Captain Hayes replied, his voice carrying the authority of 3 decades in aviation, "but he doesn't own the airline." "She does." Brandon looked around the cabin as if seeking support from fellow passengers, but found only phones recording his humiliation and faces showing various degrees of disgust at his entitled behavior. "This is ridiculous," he muttered, but he began gathering his belongings. "Wait until my father hears about this," Mr. Whitmore Maya said quietly. "Your father is going to hear about this regardless. The question is whether he hears about his son gracefully accepting responsibility for his mistake, or whether he hears about his son throwing a tantrum on national television." Brandon's face flushed red, but he finished collecting his things and stalked toward the back of the plane, muttering under his breath about lawsuits and political connections that suddenly seemed much less impressive. Carlos Rivera stepped forward, his voice hesitant but determined. "Ma'am, I'm Carlos Rivera, and I want to apologize. I knew something was wrong, but I should have spoken up more forcefully. Maya looked at Carlos with genuine appreciation. "Mr. Rivera, you did speak up multiple times. In fact, you're the only crew member who tried to do the right thing." Victoria was standing against the galley counter now, her perfect composure completely shattered. "This is all a misunderstanding," she said desperately. "I was following protocol, protecting our premium customers from potential fraud." "You never intended what Maya interrupted, her voice carrying a new edge. "You never intended to get caught. You never intended for your victim to actually have power. You never intended for your racism to be broadcast to 50,000 people on social media. I am not a racist," Victoria said, her voice rising with desperate denial. "I treat all passengers equally." Elena Maya said into her phone, "Could you please pull Miss Ashworth's employment record? I'd like to know if there have been any previous complaints about her behavior toward passengers." Elena's response was swift and damning. "Victoria Ashworth has been employed by Skyline Airlines for 8 years. She has 6 formal complaints on file for discriminatory behavior, 4 involving passengers of color, 2 involving passengers with disabilities. All were resolved through counseling and additional training." The first-class cabin fell completely silent except for the ambient noise of the aircraft's systems and the distant sound of passengers boarding in economy. Victoria's perfect facade had crumbled completely, leaving behind a woman whose career had just been exposed as a pattern of prejudice and discrimination. Jennifer Thompson, the business executive who had been watching the entire confrontation unfold, stood up and addressed Maya directly. "Miss Blackwood, I want you to know that I've been recording this entire incident. If you need witnesses to what happened here, I'm prepared to provide testimony. So, I said another passenger, a Hispanic man traveling with his family. My children were watching, and they need to understand that this kind of behavior has consequences." Captain Hayes looked at Victoria with something approaching pity. "Victoria, you're relieved of duty effective immediately. Please gather your personal belongings and report to the gate supervisor." "Captain, please," Victoria's voice cracked. "This job is my whole life. I've worked so hard, you've worked hard to discriminate against paying customers," Captain Hayes replied coldly. "And now there are consequences." Maya watched Victoria's breakdown with the detached professionalism of someone who had seen many careers and most of them deservedly. "Miss Ashworth, you asked me earlier if I understood who belonged in first class. Let me be clear, everyone who pays for a ticket belongs here regardless of what they look like, what they wear, or whether they meet your personal definition of premium passenger." Victoria gathered her things with shaking hands. Her perfect hair disheveled, her emerald silk blouse wrinkled from stress sweat. As she walked toward the aircraft door, Maya called out one final time, "Miss Ashworth, this didn't happen because you made a mistake. This happened because you chose to treat people differently based on their race. Those are very different things." Victoria didn't respond. She couldn't. There was nothing left to say. Carlos Rivera stepped forward to take over Victoria's duties, his face serious but determined. "Miss Blackwood, would you like me to show you to your seat?" Maya smiled at him, the first genuinely warm expression she'd shown since boarding the aircraft. "Thank you, Carlos. I appreciate your professionalism through all of this." As Maya finally settled into seat 2A, the seat she had paid for, the seat she had been denied, the seat that had cost Victoria Ashworth her career, Elena's voice came through her phone one more time. "Maya, I'm showing that this incident is trending on 7 social media platforms. The hashtags Maya Blackwood and Skyline scandal are approaching viral status. Media outlets are beginning to pick up the story." Maya looked around the first-class cabin, now quiet except for the subdued conversations of passengers processing what they had just witnessed. In 9 minutes, she had gone from being a victim of discrimination to revealing the truth about organized racism in her own company. But she wasn't finished, not even close. "Elena," she said quietly, "how many other crew members were involved in this decision to deny me service based on the gate records and crew communications? At least 4 people were directly involved. Derek Morrison, Tom Richardson, Victoria Ashworth, and potentially others who facilitated the seat transfer." Maya nodded slowly. "Then we're not done here. not by a long shot. The plane hadn't even taken off yet, and already the consequences were spreading like wildfire through social media, through corporate communications, through the airline industry itself. Victoria Ashworth and Derek Morrison had thought they were dealing with just another passenger who didn't know her place. Instead, they had triggered an earthquake that would reshape how airlines treated customers, how corporations addressed discrimination, and how justice could unfold in real time in the age of social media. The flight to Miami was going to be very different than anyone had expected. Elena, patch me through to corporate command. It's time everyone knew exactly what's been happening on my airline. Maya Blackwood's voice carried a new authority as she settled into seat 2A, finally occupying the space she had paid for and been denied. The first-class cabin was hushed passengers still processing the dramatic confrontation they had just witnessed. Carlos Rivera was efficiently managing the galley, stepping into Victoria Ashworth's role with nervous competence. Through her phone's speaker, Elena Rodriguez's voice was crisp and professional. Maya, I have Jonathan Pierce, CFO Sarah Mitchell from Legal, and Robert Chen from Communications standing by on the corporate line. Are you ready for a conference call? Put them through, Maya replied, making no effort to lower her voice. The passengers around her deserved to hear this. They were witnesses to discrimination, and they deserved to see justice unfold in real time. Maya, this is Jonathan, came the voice of Skyline Airlines' chief financial officer. Elena briefed us on the situation. We're watching the social media explosion in real time. This is a crisis. Jonathan, this isn't a crisis, Maya replied calmly. This is an awakening. How long have you known about the discrimination complaints against Victoria Ashworth and Derek Morrison? There was a pause, the kind of silence that speaks volumes in corporate communications. Maya, the complaints were handled through normal HR channels. Counseling, additional training. 6 complaints against Victoria alone. Maya cut him off. 4 involving passengers of color. And your solution was counseling. Sarah, are you on this call? I'm here, Maya, came the voice of Sarah Mitchell, Skyline's general counsel. And I have to advise that this conversation is being recorded. And Sarah, everything that's happened here today has been recorded by dozens of passengers and broadcast live to 70,000 people. We're far beyond worrying about recorded conversations. Jessica Morales, still live streaming from the boarding area, was providing running commentary to her massive audience. Folks, she's on a conference call with airline executives right now. This is incredible. We're getting a real-time look at how corporate America handles discrimination when they can't hide behind closed doors. Maya continued, her voice cutting through any attempt at corporate damage control. Sarah, I want a full audit of every discrimination complaint filed in the past 5 years. I want to know how many were dismissed, how many resulted in actual consequences, and how many employees are still working for us despite patterns of discriminatory behavior. Maya, that's going to take time. You have 48 hours, Maya interrupted. And Sarah, I want Derek Morrison terminated immediately. Not suspended pending investigation. Terminated. He admitted on camera to racial profiling and fraudulent seat reassignment. Robert Chen from Communications finally spoke up, his voice tight with barely controlled panic. Maya, the media is calling. CNN, Fox, MSNBC, they all want statements about the incident. The hashtag is trending globally. Our stock price has dropped 3% in the last hour. Maya smiled grimly. Robert, here's your statement. Skyline Airlines does not tolerate discrimination in any form. Employees who engage in racist behavior will be terminated immediately, and we are implementing comprehensive reforms to ensure this never happens again. That's it. No corporate speak, no deflection, no excuses. But Maya, we need to consider the legal implications. The legal implications of what Maya's voice carried across the cabin. Firing employees who discriminate against customers. The legal implications of treating all passengers with respect regardless of race. What exactly are you worried about, Robert? Captain Hayes, who had been listening from the cockpit doorway, stepped forward. Miss Blackwood, if I may interrupt, we have another situation developing at the gate. Maya looked up at him with raised eyebrows. What kind of situation? Derek Morrison is apparently attempting to board the aircraft. Security is holding him, but he's claiming he has work duties to complete. Elena Maya said into her phone, "Did you hear that I heard? Maya Derek Morrison was terminated 16 minutes ago. His access badges have been deactivated, his company credit cards have been canceled, and security has been notified that he's no longer an employee. If he's attempting to board, he's trespassing." Through the aircraft windows, passengers could see a commotion developing at the gate. Derek Morrison was arguing with airport security, his face red with anger and desperation. Tom Richardson, the gate supervisor, was trying to calm the situation while passengers filmed everything with their phones. "This is unreal," Jessica narrated to her live stream audience. "The gate agent who started this whole thing is trying to get on the plane. Security is stopping him. This is like watching someone's entire life fall apart in real time." Maya stood up and walked to the window, looking down at Derek's increasingly desperate gesticulations. "Elena, is Derek Morrison aware that he's been terminated? He should be. HR sent the notification to his personal phone and email 17 minutes ago. He's also been removed from all company systems. Captain Hayes, please ask security to inform Mr. Morrison that he is no longer employed by Skyline Airlines and that any attempt to board this aircraft will result in his arrest for trespassing." Captain Hayes nodded and stepped away to make the call. Within minutes, they could see additional security officers arriving at the gate. Derek's argument became more animated, then suddenly collapsed as the reality of his situation finally hit him. Jennifer Thompson, the business executive in seat 3B, leaned forward. "Miss Blackwood, I have to ask, are you always this calm when dealing with crisis situations?" Maya turned back toward her, a slight smile playing at her lips. "Miss Thompson, this isn't a crisis for me. This is a crisis for the people who decided that discriminating against customers was acceptable. I'm just the person who finally had the power to do something about it." "But surely you must be angry," pressed Miguel Santos, the Hispanic father who had been recording earlier. "The way they treated you, the things they said, Mr. Santos." "I am angry," Maya replied. "I'm furious, but anger without strategy is just noise. What you're seeing here today is strategic anger. Every decision, every response, every consequence has been calculated to ensure this never happens again." "Maya," came Jonathan's voice through the phone. "We need to discuss the financial implications. The stock drop, the media attention, the potential lawsuits. Jonathan, let me make something very clear." Maya's voice took on an edge that made everyone in first class pay attention. "I would rather see Skyline Airlines stock price drop to zero than continue operating an airline that discriminates against passengers based on race. Do you understand me? Yes. But Maya, the shareholders, I am the majority shareholder, Jonathan, and I'm more concerned with the moral implications than the financial ones. If other shareholders don't like our commitment to treating all customers with dignity and respect, they're welcome to sell their stock." Carlos Rivera approached Maya's seat with obvious nervousness. "Ma'am, I'm sorry to interrupt, but we have passengers in economy asking questions about the delay. They can see the commotion at the gate, and some of them are getting concerned about whether we're going to depart." Maya looked at Carlos thoughtfully. "Mr. Rivera, how long have you worked for Skyline Airlines? 3 years, ma'am. And in those 3 years, how many incidents like today's have you witnessed?" Carlos's face tightened. "More than I'd like to admit, ma'am. Not always this extreme, but patterns of behavior that made me uncomfortable. Why didn't you report them?" Carlos looked around the cabin, aware that dozens of phones were still recording that his words would be part of the permanent record of this incident. "Honestly, because I was afraid of losing my job. Victoria and Derek have been here much longer than me. They have connection seniority. I figured no one would believe me." Maya nodded slowly. "Mr. Rivera, I want you to know something. Effective immediately, you're being promoted to senior flight attendant. More importantly, I want you to head up our new passenger advocacy program. Your job will be to ensure that what happened today never happens again." Carlos's eyes widened. "Ma'am, Are you serious, dead serious, Elena? Are you noting Mr. Rivera's promotion?" Noted and processed. Elena's voice came through the speaker. Carlos Rivera is now Senior Flight Attendant and Program Director for Passenger Advocacy effective immediately. The first-class cabin burst into spontaneous applause. Carlos stood there, stunned, tears forming in his eyes. "Thank you, ma'am. I promise I won't let you down. Mr. Rivera, you already proved you won't let me down when you stood up to Victoria despite being afraid for your job. That's exactly the kind of moral courage we need more of." "Maya," came Sarah Mitchell's voice from legal. "We need to discuss the implementation timeline for these reforms. The scope of what you're proposing, Sarah, let me stop you right there. This isn't a proposal. These are direct orders from the majority shareholder. I want a comprehensive anti-discrimination policy drafted within 72 hours. I want mandatory bias training for all customer-facing employees implemented within 30 days. And I want a zero-tolerance policy for discrimination that results in immediate termination. But Maya, we need time to consult with HR to review legal precedents. Sarah, we've had 5 years to review legal precedents while employees like Victoria and Derek discriminated against customers with impunity. Time for consultation is over. Time for action has begun." Through the aircraft windows, passengers could see Derek Morrison being escorted away from the gate by security officers. His shoulders were slumped, his confident demeanor completely shattered. The man who had started this incident by questioning Maya's right to sit in first class was now being removed from the airport in handcuffs. Elena Maya said, "What's the current status on our social media monitoring, Maya? The story has been picked up by major news outlets. Maya Blackwood is trending in 12 countries. We're approaching 200,000 mentions across all platforms. The response has been overwhelmingly supportive of your actions. Jessica Morales' live stream had grown to over 90,000 viewers. Folks, I've been covering travel and social justice issues for 3 years, and I have never seen anything like this. A CEO catching discrimination at her own company, firing employees on the spot, implementing reforms in real time. This is history being made." Maya looked around the first-class cabin, taking in the faces of passengers who had witnessed something extraordinary. They weren't just customers anymore. They were part of a story that would be told and retold as an example of how justice could unfold when people refused to accept discrimination as normal. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, addressing the cabin directly, "I want to thank you for being witnesses to what happened here today. Your recordings, your willingness to speak up, your refusal to look away when injustice was happening. That's what made real change possible." Jennifer Thompson raised her hand slightly. "Miss Blackwood, what happens next? I mean, after today, how do we know this kind of thing won't just continue at other airlines, other companies?" Maya's smile was both determined and slightly dangerous. "Miss Thompson, what happens next is that every airline, every hotel, every restaurant, every company that deals with the public knows that there are consequences for discrimination. What happens next is that employees like Carlos who want to do the right thing know they'll be supported instead of silenced. What happens next is that people like Derek and Victoria learn that racism isn't just morally wrong, it's economically catastrophic." The aircraft finally began to move, pulling back from the gate as Captain Hayes initiated the departure process. As they taxied toward the runway, Maya looked out the window at the Chicago skyline, reflecting on how a simple flight home had turned into a moment that would reshape her entire company. But even as the plane lifted off, she knew the real work was just beginning. Firing 2 employees was easy. Changing an entire corporate culture would be much harder. But for the first time in months, Maya Blackwood felt optimistic about the future of her airline. Even if you are who you say you are, procedure is procedure. The words came from Tom Richardson, the gate supervisor who had finally made it onto the aircraft. He stood in the first-class aisle, sweaty and nervous, trying to salvage a situation that had already spiraled completely beyond his control. Behind him, airport security waited in the jet bridge, uncertain about what they were supposed to do now that the problematic passenger had turned out to be the owner of the airline. Maya looked up from her phone where Elena was still coordinating the rapidly expanding crisis response from corporate headquarters in Miami. "Mr. Richardson, could you please explain to me what procedure allows employees to give away confirmed first-class seats to political connections while denying service to the actual paying customer. Tom's face went pale. "Ma'am, that's not—" there was a system error, and Derek was trying to accommodate a special request from Senator Whitmore's office. Maya finished for him. "Elena, are you recording this conversation?" Every word, Elena's voice came through the speaker clear and cold. "Maya, I should mention that we've also received calls from 3 different news organizations requesting interviews about the incident." Jennifer Thompson, the business executive in 3B, leaned forward with obvious fascination. "Miss Blackwood, how often does this happen? Airlines bumping paying customers for political favors? More often than you'd think, Miss Thompson. But usually the passengers who get bumped don't have the resources to fight back. They accept the inconvenience, they file complaints that get ignored, and the airline moves on to the next victim." Carlos Rivera, still adjusting to his sudden promotion, stepped forward with a tablet in his hands. "Ma'am, I've been reviewing the passenger manifest and gate logs. Mr. Richardson, you personally approved the seat transfer from Miss Blackwood to Mr. Whitmore." Tom's hands shook as he tried to formulate a response. "That was—" Derek said there was an issue with the original passenger, that she was a no-show mister. Richardson. Maya interrupted, her voice dangerously quiet. "I checked in online 12 hours ago. I was never a no-show. You and Derek simply decided that a senator's son deserved my seat more than I did." Miguel Santos, the Hispanic father traveling with his family, had been listening intently to the conversation. "Ma'am, if I may ask, what happens to supervisors who approve discriminatory actions? Does this go all the way up the chain?" Maya's smile was sharp. "Mr. Santos, that's exactly what we're about to find out. Elena, I want you to pull the communication logs between Derek Morrison and Tom Richardson for the past 6 months. I want to see how many times they've engaged in this kind of creative seat reassignment." "Already in progress," Elena replied. "Maya, preliminary data shows at least 12 instances in the past 6 months where confirmed reservations were transferred to passengers with political or financial connections. In 9 of those cases, the original passengers were minorities. The first-class cabin fell silent except for the ambient noise of the aircraft's climb to cruising altitude. Tom Richardson looked like he was going to be sick. The security officers in the jet bridge were recording everything, unsure whether they were supposed to be arresting someone or protecting someone. Jessica Morales, still live-streaming to her massive audience, provided commentary in hushed tones. "Folks, we're getting real-time data about a pattern of discrimination. This isn't just about one incident. This is about a scheme that's been going on for months." Mr. Richardson. Maya continued, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to making decisions that affected thousands of employees. "You've been a supervisor at Skyline Airlines for how long?" 8 years. Whispered, his voice barely audible. "And in 8 years, how many discrimination complaints have you received about employees under your supervision?" Tom's mouth opened and closed without sound. Carlos Rivera consulted his tablet and provided the answer. According to HR records, Mr. Richardson has received 17 formal complaints about discriminatory behavior from his staff. All were resolved through additional training and counseling. 17 complaints. Maya repeated, letting the number hang in the air. "And your solution was always more training. Never termination, never real consequences, just more training." Jennifer Thompson shook her head in disgust. "How is that possible? How does someone accumulate 17 discrimination complaints and keep their job?" "Because," Ms. Thompson. Maya replied, "companies like mine have been more concerned with avoiding bad publicity than addressing bad behavior. We've treated discrimination as a training issue rather than a moral failing that deserves immediate consequences." "Maya," came Jonathan Pierce's voice through the phone speaker. "We need to discuss the liability exposure here. If we've been organized..." Maya cut him off. "Jonathan, I specifically told you, we don't use that word. This has been organized discrimination, institutional bias, structured prejudice, call it what it is. But Maya, the legal implications. The legal implications of doing the right thing. Jonathan, the legal implications of treating customers fairly regardless of race. If we get sued for firing employees who discriminate against passengers, then we'll defend those lawsuits all the way to the Supreme Court." Captain Hayes's voice came through the cabin speakers. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We've reached our cruising altitude of 37,000 feet. However, I want to address the unusual circumstances of our departure this morning." Maya looked up with surprise. Captain Hayes wasn't supposed to be making announcements about the incident. "As many of you may have witnessed," Captain Hayes continued, "we experienced a serious customer service failure at the gate today. Discrimination of any kind is absolutely unacceptable on my aircraft, and I want to personally apologize to any passengers who witnessed or experienced inappropriate treatment." The cabin erupted in spontaneous applause. Passengers throughout the aircraft, not just in the first class, began clapping and cheering. Maya felt an unexpected wave of emotion as she realized that Captain Hayes was making a statement that would be heard by every passenger on the flight. Furthermore, Captain Hayes's voice continued, "I want you to know that the employees responsible for today's discrimination have been terminated, and Skyline Airlines is implementing comprehensive reforms to ensure this never happens again. We are committed to providing respectful, dignified service to every passenger regardless of race, ethnicity, or economic status." The applause continued for nearly a minute. Carlos Rivera was visibly emotional, tears streaming down his face, as he realized that the culture of silence and complicity he'd endured for 3 years was finally ending. Tom Richardson stood in the aisle, looking utterly defeated. "Miss Blackwood, what happens to me now?" Maya studied him for a long moment. "Mr. Richardson, that depends entirely on what you do in the next 5 minutes. You can continue trying to justify the unjustifiable, or you can help us understand how deep this problem goes." I don't understand. I'm offering you the opportunity to cooperate with our internal investigation. Tell us about the culture that made employees think discrimination was acceptable. Tell us about the policies that enabled this behavior. Help us fix what's broken." Tom looked around the cabin, seeing the recording phones, the expectant faces the security officers still waiting in the jet bridge. "And if I cooperate, you keep your job, but you're demoted to gate agent and placed on probation. You undergo extensive bias training and you help implement the new anti-discrimination policies. If I ever receive another complaint about your behavior, you're terminated immediately. And if I don't cooperate," Maya's voice was ice cold, "then you join Derek Morrison in the unemployment line and we proceed with the investigation without your input." Tom Richardson was quiet for nearly a minute, the weight of his decision visible on his face. Finally, he spoke in a voice barely above a whisper. "There are more people involved. Regional managers who knew about the complaints and chose to ignore them. HR directors who created the policies that made discrimination easy to hide. This goes higher up the chain than just Derek and Victoria. How much higher, all the way to the vice president level." Maya's expression didn't change, but several passengers gasped audibly. Elena's voice came through the speaker immediately. "Maya, are you getting this? We need names, documentation, everything. Mr. Richardson," Maya said calmly, "I want you to work with Mr. Rivera and our corporate compliance team to document every person, every policy, and every incident that contributed to this culture of discrimination. This is your chance to be part of the solution instead of part of the problem." Carlos Rivera stepped forward with his tablet ready. "Mr. Richardson, should we start with the regional managers who knew about the complaints?" Tom nodded slowly. "Vice President Angela Davis knew about the pattern. She specifically instructed us to handle complaints quietly and avoid escalation to corporate levels. She said that some complaints were just troublemakers trying to get free upgrades or compensation." The admission hit the cabin like a physical blow. Angela Davis was a name Maya recognized, a 20-year veteran of the airline industry, someone she'd inherited when Blackwood Industries acquired Skyline Airlines. Elena Maya said into her phone, "I want Angela Davis suspended immediately pending a full investigation. I want her access revoked, her communications preserved, and a complete audit of every decision she's made regarding discrimination complaints." Already in progress, Elena replied, Maya, this is going to require a comprehensive review of our entire customer service structure. Jennifer Thompson raised her hand tentatively. Miss Blackwood, can I ask how you're handling this emotionally? I mean, finding out that your own company has been organized discriminating against people who look like you. Maya was quiet for a moment considering the question. Miss Thompson, it's heartbreaking and infuriating and motivating all at the same time. Heartbreaking because of the passengers who were mistreated. Infuriating because it happened under my ownership. And motivating because I finally have the power to fix it. But surely you must have known. No, I didn't know, Maya cut her off firmly. I knew there were complaints, but I trusted my management team to handle them appropriately. That was clearly a mistake. Corporate leadership can't delegate responsibility for discrimination and then claim ignorance when it happens. Miguel Santos leaned forward. So, what's the long-term solution? How do you prevent this from happening again? Mr. Santos, we're going to start by firing every manager who enabled this behavior. Then, we're going to implement zero-tolerance policies with real consequences. We're going to create reporting mechanisms that bypass local management and go directly to corporate compliance. And we're going to make discrimination so expensive for this company that no employee will ever risk their career on it again. Tom Richardson was taking notes as Carlos questioned him about specific incidents and individuals. The list of people involved in covering up or enabling discrimination was growing longer by the minute. Maya came Sarah Mitchell's voice from legal. We're going to need to coordinate with external auditors and possibly federal investigators. The scope of this is beyond what we can handle internally. Sarah, I want you to call the Department of Transportation immediately. I want a federal investigation into our practices, and I want it to be public. No hiding behind corporate attorneys or publicity firms. Full transparency. But Maya, that's going to create massive liability exposure. Sarah, our liability exposure comes from discriminating against customers, not from cooperating with federal investigations into discrimination. Call the DOT. As the aircraft continued its flight toward Miami, the scope of the scandal continued to expand. What had started as a single incident of discrimination was revealing itself to be part of a much larger pattern of institutional bias that had infected the airline at multiple levels. But for the first time in years, Maya Blackwood felt like she was finally doing something meaningful with her power and wealth. She wasn't just running a profitable company anymore. She was dismantling a culture of discrimination and rebuilding it into something better. The revolution had begun at 37,000 feet, and there was no turning back. For anyone watching, this isn't an isolated case. This is organized discrimination, and this company is corrupt from top to bottom. Jessica Morales' voice carried clearly through her phone as she continued live streaming from the aircraft, her viewer count now exceeding 150,000 people. The hashtag Skyline Scandal was trending globally with news outlets across the country, picking up the story and amplifying it to millions more. Maya Blackwood looked up from her intense conversation with corporate headquarters to see Tom Richardson hunched over Carlos Rivera's tablet, methodically documenting years of discriminatory practices with the desperate efficiency of a man trying to save his career. Elena Maya said into her phone, "How extensive is the data Tom is providing us, Maya?" "It's damning." Elena's voice was tight with controlled anger. "We're looking at a network of managers who actively suppressed discrimination complaints, an HR department that created policies specifically designed to avoid accountability, and a culture where discriminating against minorities was not just tolerated but rewarded." Jennifer Thompson, who had been recording the conversation on her own phone, leaned forward with visible disgust. "Rewarded? What do you mean, rewarded?" "Carlos." Rivera looked up from his tablet, his face grim. "Ma'am, Mr. Richardson just explained their internal scoring. Managers who kept complaint numbers low, regardless of how they did it, received better performance reviews and larger bonuses." The first-class cabin erupted in angry murmurs. Miguel Santos, traveling with his young children, shook his head in disbelief. So they were literally paid to discriminate. "Not exactly," Tom Richardson said, his voice barely audible. "We were paid to keep complaints from reaching corporate levels. How we did that was left up to interpretation. Maya's voice cut through the conversations like a blade. Mr. Richardson explained to these passengers exactly how you kept complaints from reaching corporate levels. Tom looked around the cabin, seeing the recording phones, the angry faces, the children who would grow up remembering this moment. We had several strategies. Sometimes we offered small compensations to make complaints go away. Sometimes we transferred complaining passengers to other flights and marked them as difficult customers in the system. Sometimes we simply lost the paperwork. And sometimes Maya prompted her voice dangerously quiet. Sometimes we told passengers that filing formal complaints would get them banned from flying with us. We said their names would go on a no-fly list shared between airlines. The cabin fell completely silent except for the sound of phones recording and Jessica's live-stream commentary. Folks, did you hear that? They threatened passengers with no-fly lists to prevent them from reporting discrimination. Maya stood up, her composed facade finally cracking slightly. Mr. Richardson, you threatened to ban passengers from air travel because they complained about being discriminated against. It wasn't my idea, Tom said desperately. The policy came from regional management. We were told that some passengers were just chronic complainers who hurt the airline's reputation. Elena Maya said, her voice now carrying an edge that made everyone in first class pay attention. I want you to pull every no-fly recommendation from Tom Richardson's region for the past 5 years. I want to see who was banned from flying and why. Already pulling that data, Elena replied. Maya preliminary numbers show 47 no-fly recommendations from his region. 31 were passengers of color who had filed discrimination complaints. The numbers hit the cabin like physical blows. 47 people banned from flying. 31 minorities who had simply asked to be treated fairly. Jennifer Thompson was recording everything, her business executive's mind clearly calculating the legal and financial implications. Miss Blackwood, this isn't just discrimination anymore. This is organized retaliation against civil rights complaints. The Department of Justice is going to be very interested in this. Miss Thompson is correct, Maya replied. Elena, add the DOJ to our call list. This has moved beyond airline regulation into civil rights violations. Carlos Rivera had been quietly taking notes throughout the conversation, but now he looked up with obvious distress. Ma'am, I have to ask how many passengers were actually banned from flying because they complained about discrimination. Tom Richardson consulted his own notes, his hands shaking. In my region alone, probably dozens over the past 5 years. But the practice was company-wide. Every region had similar policies. Maya sat down heavily, the full scope of the corruption finally hitting her. Elena, I want a complete audit of every no-fly recommendation in the company's history. I want to know how many people were banned from air travel because they stood up for their civil rights. Maya, that's going to take weeks to compile, Elena warned. Then start today and work around the clock. I want a preliminary report within 72 hours. Captain Hayes's voice came through the cabin speakers again. Miss Blackwood, I apologize for the interruption, but we have an unusual situation developing. Miami Air Traffic Control has informed me that we have multiple news helicopters requesting permission to film our landing. Apparently, this story has attracted significant media attention. Maya looked out the window at the cloud formations passing below, reflecting on how a simple flight home had turned into a national news event. Captain Hayes, are you comfortable with news helicopters filming the landing? Ma'am, I'm more concerned about the safety implications. If there are crowds at the gate, additional security requirements, media chaos, we might need to consider alternative arrival procedures. Elena Maya said into her phone, What's the situation at Miami International? Maya, it's intense. We have news crews from 6 different networks. Airport security has cordoned off the entire gate area, and there are approximately 300 people gathered to witness your arrival. Social media has turned this into a civil rights moment. Jessica Morales looked up from her live stream with obvious excitement. Miss Blackwood, my viewers are calling this the most important civil rights moment in corporate America since the Montgomery bus boycott. You've exposed organized discrimination at a Fortune 500 company in real time on live television with immediate consequences. Maya felt the weight of that comparison, the responsibility that came with accidentally becoming a symbol of resistance to institutional racism. Miss Morales, I didn't set out to become a civil rights symbol, I just wanted to fly home to Miami. But that's exactly why this matters so much. Miguel Santos interjected, his children listening intently. You didn't ask for special treatment. You didn't make demands based on your wealth or position. You simply insisted on being treated the same as any other paying customer. And when they refused, Jennifer Thompson added, you had the power to do something about it. Most people who experience discrimination don't have that power. Maya nodded slowly. Miss Thompson, that's exactly why this has to lead to real change. Not just for people who own airlines, but for every passenger who deserves to be treated with dignity and respect. Tom Richardson cleared his throat tentatively. Ma'am, if I may, there's something else you need to know about the no-fly system. Maya looked at him with growing dread. What else? The lists were shared. Not just between regions within Skyline, but with other airlines. We had informal agreements with our competitors to honor each other's no-fly recommendations. The cabin erupted in outrage. Even Carlos Rivera, who had been maintaining professional composure throughout the revelations, looked shocked. You mean that if someone complained about discrimination at Skyline, Maya said, her voice dangerously quiet, they could be banned from flying on other airlines as well? Yes, ma'am. It was called industry cooperation, but it was really about making sure that troublemakers couldn't just switch airlines. Maya stood up again, pacing the small confines of the first-class aisle. Elena, this is now a federal antitrust issue as well. Airlines colluding to retaliate against passengers who file civil rights complaints. Call the FBI. Maya, are you sure the FBI involvement is going to turn this into a massive federal investigation? Elena, good. It should be a massive federal investigation. These practices have been going on for years, affecting hundreds of passengers involving multiple airlines. If we don't expose the full scope of the corruption, nothing will actually change. Jessica's live stream viewers had grown to over 200,000, with comments flowing so fast they were unreadable. Folks, we're witnessing history. Not just a corporate scandal, but the exposure of industry-wide discrimination and retaliation. This is going to change how airlines treat passengers forever. Captain Hayes's voice came through the speakers again. Miss Blackwood Miami International has cleared us for a direct approach to Gate B12. However, airport security advises that we should expect significant crowds and media presence. Maya looked around the first-class cabin, seeing the faces of passengers who had become accidental witnesses to a corporate revolution. Ladies and gentlemen, when we land in Miami, you're going to see media attention unlike anything you've probably experienced. You are welcome to speak to reporters about what you witnessed today, but please know that you are under no obligation to do so. Miss Blackwood Jennifer Thompson said, I want you to know that I plan to speak to reporters. What happened here today needs to be heard by as many people as possible. So do I, Miguel Santos added. My children need to see that there are consequences for discrimination, that people in positions of power sometimes do the right thing. Carlos Rivera stood up from his tablet, his documentation complete. Ma'am, I finished compiling Mr. Richardson's information. We have names, dates, policies, and specific incidents going back 5 years. This is comprehensive evidence of organized discrimination. Maya took the tablet and scrolled through the data, seeing the scope of the corruption laid out in stark detail. Hundreds of incidents, dozens of banned passengers, multiple levels of management involvement. A culture where racism wasn't just tolerated but rewarded. Elena, she said into her phone, send this data to the FBI, the DOJ, the Department of Transportation, and every major news outlet in the country. I want complete transparency, Maya. That's going to create a firestorm. The legal implications, the financial impact, Elena, the legal implications of doing nothing would be worse. The financial impact of continuing to discriminate against customers would be catastrophic. This ends today. As the aircraft began its descent toward Miami, Maya looked out the window at the city where her corporate headquarters stood 37 floors above the airport. In a few hours, she would be back in her office leading a company that would be fundamentally different from the one she had left 3 days ago. The easy part had been firing the employees who discriminated against her. The hard part would be rebuilding an entire corporate culture, implementing new policies, and earning back the trust of every passenger who had been mistreated by her airline. But for the first time in years, Maya Blackwood felt like her wealth and power were being used for something truly important. She wasn't just making money anymore. She was making justice. As CEO of Blackwood Industries and majority shareholder of Skyline Airlines, I'm implementing immediate terminations and comprehensive reforms. Maya's voice carried throughout the first-class cabin with the authority of someone who had just discovered the full extent of corruption within her own company. Elena Rodriguez was still on the phone from Miami headquarters, coordinating the largest single-day corporate restructuring in Skyline Airlines history. Elena, let's start with the terminations. Derek Morrison and Victoria Ashworth are already processed. Add Tom Richardson's supervisor, regional manager David Parker, and vice president Angela Davis. Immediate termination security escort full investigation of their personnel files. Processing now, Elena's voice was crisp with efficiency. Maya, I also have HR Director Michelle Santos on standby. Based on Tom's testimony about policy creation, she appears to be directly involved in creating the discrimination protocols. Maya looked at Tom Richardson, who was pale but still cooperating with the investigation. Mr. Richardson, was Michelle Santos involved in creating the policies that allowed you to suppress discrimination complaints? Tom nodded miserably. She wrote the handbook, called it Customer Service Conflict Resolution, but it was really a guide for making complaints disappear without reaching corporate levels. Elena, add Michelle Santos to the termination list. I want her escorted from the building before we land. Carlos Rivera, still processing his sudden promotion to senior flight attendant and program director, looked up from his tablet. Ma'am, if we're terminating this many managers, who's going to handle operations while we restructure? Excellent question, Mr. Rivera. Elena, I want you to contact our board of directors immediately. Tell them we're implementing emergency governance procedures. Any manager with documented involvement in discrimination will be replaced by interim leadership while we conduct full investigations. Jennifer Thompson leaned forward with obvious fascination. Miss Blackwood, you're essentially firing an entire management layer. How do you maintain operations during something like this? Maya's smile was grim. Miss Thompson, we're going to promote people like Carlos who had the moral courage to speak up, and we're going to hire external experts to help us rebuild our customer service culture from the ground up. Maya, came Elena's voice through the phone. I've been monitoring social media response to the live streams. The story has reached every major news outlet. We have interview requests from CNN, NBC, ABC, and Fox News. The Secretary of Transportation's office has called requesting a meeting. Jessica Morales looked up from her phone with excitement. Miss Blackwood, Maya Blackwood, is trending in 18 countries now. People are calling this the most important corporate accountability moment since Enron. Miss Morales, the difference is that we're taking responsibility instead of trying to cover it up. Elena, accept the interview requests. I want to speak publicly about what we discovered and what we're doing to fix it. Captain Hayes's voice came through the cabin speakers. Ladies and gentlemen, we're beginning our final descent into Miami International Airport. Flight attendants, please prepare for landing. Maya stood up and addressed the first-class cabin directly. I want to thank all of you for being witnesses to what happened today. Your willingness to record what you saw, to speak up when injustice was happening, made real change possible. Miguel Santos raised his hand. Miss Blackwood, what's going to happen to the passengers who were banned from flying because they complained about discrimination? Mr. Santos, every passenger who was wrongfully placed on no-fly lists will be personally contacted by me, offered full compensation, and given guaranteed premium service for life. But more importantly, we're going to create an industry-wide coalition to ensure this kind of retaliation never happens again. How can you guarantee that? Jennifer Thompson asked. Because, Miss Thompson, we're going to make discrimination so expensive for airlines that no company will be able to afford it. We're going to lobby for federal legislation making retaliation against civil rights complaints a criminal offense. Tom Richardson spoke up tentatively. Ma'am, what about the other airlines that were part of the no-fly sharing agreements? Are you going to expose them too? Maya looked at him with something approaching respect. Mr. Richardson, you're asking the right questions now. Yes, we're going to provide federal investigators with every detail about industry-wide collaboration on discriminatory practices. This isn't just about Skyline Airlines anymore. Elena Maya continued into her phone. I want you to schedule meetings with the CEOs of our major competitors. We're going to offer them the opportunity to implement similar reforms voluntarily, or they can wait for federal investigators to force changes. Maya, that's essentially declaring war on the entire airline industry. Elena, I'm declaring war on discrimination in the airline industry. Companies that want to continue treating customers fairly have nothing to worry about. Carlos Rivera was taking notes on his tablet. Ma'am, should I start drafting the new customer service protocols while we're restructuring Mr. Rivera? I want you to work directly with our legal team and external civil rights experts. The new protocols need to be bulletproof against discrimination and crystal clear about consequences. As the aircraft touched down at Miami International, passengers could see the massive media presence waiting at the gate. News vans, camera crews, and crowds of people had gathered to witness the arrival of a story that had captured national attention. Maya, Elena's voice came through the phone airport security as the entire gate area cordoned off. They're recommending that you exit through the jet bridge and speak to media in a controlled environment. Elena, no controlled environment. I want to walk through the terminal like any other passenger. The whole point of today was that everyone deserves to be treated equally. Jessica Morales was still live streaming as the aircraft taxied to the gate. Folks, we're about to see how this story ends. Miss Blackwood is going to face the media, and she's going to have to explain how an airline owned by a black woman was organized discriminating against black passengers. Maya heard that and paused. Miss Morales raises an important point. This isn't just about corporate accountability. This is about how discrimination can become so entrenched that even companies owned by minorities can perpetuate racist practices. How did that happen? Miguel Santos asked. Mr. Santos, it happened because I trusted my management team to uphold our values without verifying that they were actually doing so. Corporate leadership requires constant vigilance against discrimination, not just good intentions. The aircraft came to a stop at the gate, and Captain Hayes came over the speakers one final time. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Miami International Airport. Before you deplane, I want you to know that serving as your captain during this historic flight has been an honor. What we witnessed today was the triumph of justice over prejudice, and I'm proud to have been part of it. The entire cabin erupted in applause. Passengers throughout the aircraft were standing and clapping not just for Captain Hayes, but for Maya, for Carlos, for everyone who had refused to let discrimination go unchallenged. Maya gathered her belongings and prepared to face the media circus waiting outside. But before she left her seat, the seat she had been denied, the seat that had cost multiple people their careers, the seat that had triggered a corporate revolution, she made one final call. Elena, I want you to establish the Blackwood Foundation for Transportation Equality. Initial funding of $50 million. Its mission will be to investigate discrimination in travel industries and provide legal support for passengers who experience prejudice. Maya, that's a massive commitment. Elena today cost us some managers and some bad publicity. But we gained something much more valuable. We gained the opportunity to be a company that actually lives up to its values. That's worth any amount of money. As Maya stood up to leave the aircraft, Carlos Rivera approached her with obvious emotion. Ma'am, I want to thank you for giving me the chance to be part of the solution. I promise I won't let you down. Maya shook his hand firmly. Mr. Rivera, you already proved you wouldn't let anyone down when you spoke up to Victoria despite being afraid for your job. That's the kind of moral courage we need at every level of this company. As the cabin door opened and Maya prepared to face the media, She knew that the easy part of the story was over. Firing discriminatory employees and making dramatic statements was simple compared to the long, difficult work of changing an entire corporate culture. But for the first time since acquiring Skyline Airlines, Maya Blackwood felt like she truly owned the company, not just financially but morally. And that ownership came with responsibilities she was finally ready to embrace. This isn't just about firing a few bad employees. This is about rebuilding an entire culture of respect. Maya Blackwood stood at the podium in Miami International Airport's main terminal facing a crowd of reporters' cameras and passengers who had gathered to witness the conclusion of a story that had captivated the nation. Behind her, the dramatic glass windows showed aircraft taking off and landing, a reminder that the airline industry would never be quite the same. Elena Rodriguez stood to her left, tablet in hand, coordinating the flood of interview requests, legal consultations, and corporate restructuring demands that had emerged in the 2 hours since Flight 447 had landed. Carlos Rivera was there too, still adjusting to his new role as senior flight attendant and director of passenger advocacy, fielding questions from federal investigators who had arrived to begin their inquiry into industry-wide discrimination practices. Miss Blackwood called out a reporter from CNN. "How do you respond to critics who say you're overreacting to what was essentially a customer service dispute?" Maya's expression hardened slightly. With respect, this was never a customer service dispute. This was organized discrimination that affected hundreds of passengers over multiple years. When employees are financially rewarded for suppressing civil rights complaints, when passengers are banned from air travel for demanding fair treatment, when an entire management structure is designed to enable racism that requires dramatic action. Jessica Morales, who had gained over 300,000 followers during her live stream coverage of the incident, raised her hand. "Miss Blackwood, what specific reforms are you implementing to prevent this from happening again?" Ms. Morales, "We're implementing a comprehensive 5-point reform plan. First, zero-tolerance policies for discrimination with immediate termination for any employee who engages in racist behavior. Second, mandatory bias training for every employee from baggage handlers to executives conducted by external civil rights organizations. Third, an independent passenger advocate program that bypasses local management and reports directly to corporate compliance. Fourth, transparent reporting of all discrimination complaints and their resolution. And fifth, federal oversight of our customer service practices." A reporter from the Washington Post leaned forward. "Ms. Blackwood, federal oversight is highly unusual for a private company. Why are you volunteering for that level of scrutiny?" Maya looked directly into the camera. "Because voluntary accountability is the only alternative to mandatory accountability. The airline industry has proven that it cannot self-regulate when it comes to civil rights. We're choosing to lead by example rather than wait for federal mandates." Maya Elena whispered, "We have the preliminary data on no-fly list abuses. The numbers are worse than we thought." Maya nodded grimly and addressed the crowd again. "I want to share some preliminary findings from our internal investigation. Over the past 5 years, Skyline Airlines wrongfully placed 63 passengers on no-fly lists as retaliation for discrimination complaints. 48 of those passengers were minorities. Every single one of these passengers will be personally contacted by me, offered full compensation, and provided with lifetime premium service guarantees." The crowd of reporters erupted with questions, but Maya continued. "Furthermore, we've discovered that these no-fly lists were shared with other airlines through informal industry cooperation agreements. We're providing federal investigators with complete documentation of these practices, and we're calling on other airlines to immediately review and reform their own policies." Jennifer Thompson, the business executive who had witnessed the entire incident, stepped forward to the microphone area. "Ms. Blackwood, as someone who was there from the beginning, I want to say that your response today has restored my faith in corporate accountability. But I have to ask, how do you address the financial impact of these reforms, Ms. Thompson? The financial impact of discrimination is far greater than the cost of preventing it. We're not just talking about legal settlements and reputation damage. We're talking about losing the trust and business of millions of passengers who deserve better treatment. The reforms we're implementing will make us a stronger, more profitable company in the long run. Miguel Santos approached with his 2 children who had become unexpected witnesses to a historic moment. Miss Blackwood, what do you want children like mine to learn from what happened today? Maya knelt down to speak directly to the children, her voice softening. I want them to learn that discrimination is never acceptable, that standing up for what's right is always worth it, and that people in positions of power have a responsibility to use that power to protect others. The 8-year-old girl tugged on Maya's sleeve. Are you going to make sure this doesn't happen to other kids' parents? Maya felt a wave of emotion at the innocent question. That's exactly what we're going to do. We're going to make sure that every parent, every child, every family is treated with respect when they travel. Captain Hayes appeared at the edge of the press conference, still in his pilot's uniform. Miss Blackwood, if I may interrupt, I wanted to publicly state that in 30 years of flying, I have never seen such decisive leadership in the face of institutional discrimination. The crew reforms you're implementing will make every flight safer and more respectful for passengers. Captain Hayes, thank you. Your decision to make that announcement to passengers during the flight showed the kind of moral leadership we need throughout the company. A reporter from Fox News raised his hand. Miss Blackwood, some industry analysts are saying that your reforms will be expensive to implement and may hurt the airline's competitive position. How do you respond to that? Maya stood up, her voice taking on the authority that had built a multi-billion-dollar empire. Any company that thinks treating customers fairly is too expensive to implement doesn't understand business fundamentals. Customer satisfaction, employee morale, and operational efficiency all improve when discrimination is eliminated. We're not just doing this because it's morally right, we're doing it because it's good business. Elena stepped forward with her tablet. Maya, I have updates on the immediate impacts. Derek Morrison and Victoria Ashworth's terminations have been processed. Regional Manager David Parker and VP Angela Davis were escorted from their offices an hour ago. HR Director Michelle Santos is being interviewed by federal investigators. What about the broader industry response? 3 major airlines have announced their own reviews of discrimination policies. United Airlines called requesting a meeting about industry-wide reforms. And the Air Transport Association has scheduled an emergency board meeting to address these revelations. Maya smiled for the first time since the press conference had begun. The industry is already changing, and we've only been on the ground for 2 hours. That's what happens when you choose transparency over cover-ups. Carlos Rivera approached the microphone with obvious nervousness. Ma'am, if I may address the crowd, I want to speak as someone who worked within the discriminatory setup but was afraid to challenge it. Maya stepped aside, giving Carlos the microphone. Please, Mr. Rivera, your perspective is crucial. Carlos looked out at the crowd of reporters and cameras, knowing that his words would reach millions of people. For 3 years, I watched passengers being mistreated because of their race, their clothing, their accent, their economic status. I knew it was wrong, but I was afraid that speaking up would cost me my job. Today, I learned that staying silent costs much more than speaking up ever could. His voice grew stronger as he continued. Miss Blackwood didn't just fire the people who discriminated against her. She promoted the people who tried to stop discrimination. She sent a message that moral courage is rewarded in this company. That changes everything. The crowd erupted in spontaneous applause. Several passengers from Flight 447 had stayed to watch the press conference, and they began cheering for Carlos's bravery. A young reporter from a local Miami station asked Mr. Rivera, "What would you say to other airline employees who witness discrimination but are afraid to report it?" Carlos looked directly into the camera. "I would say that silence makes you complicit. I would say that passengers are human beings who deserve dignity regardless of what they look like or what they wear. And I would say that there are more of us who believe in doing right than there are of those who want to do wrong. We just have to find the courage to speak up." Maya stepped back to the microphone. Mr. Rivera's courage is exactly why our reforms will succeed. We're not just changing policies, we're changing culture. We're creating an environment where doing the right thing is supported and celebrated. Miss Blackwood called a reporter from the Miami Herald. What's your message to other passengers who have experienced discrimination but were afraid to complain? Maya's voice carried clearly through the terminal. My message is that your experience matters. Your dignity is non-negotiable, and there are people fighting for your right to be treated fairly. File complaints, document incidents, speak up when you see injustice. Change only happens when silence is replaced by truth. Elena whispered urgently. Maya, we need to wrap up soon. The FBI wants to begin formal interviews and the Department of Transportation is requesting immediate meetings. Maya nodded and addressed the crowd one final time. In closing, I want to thank the passengers who witnessed today's events and refused to stay silent. I want to thank the media for covering this story with the seriousness it deserves. And I want to promise that Skyline Airlines will become a model for how transportation companies should treat every customer with dignity and respect. As the press conference concluded, Maya was approached by a young black girl who had been watching from the crowd with her parents. Miss Blackwood, are you going to make sure that people like me can fly without being scared? Maya knelt down again, her voice gentle but firm. Sweetheart, I'm going to make sure that people like you, people like all of us, never have to be scared about being treated unfairly when we travel. That's a promise. As Maya walked away from the podium, surrounded by her team, and trailed by reporters, she knew that the real work was just beginning. Press conferences and dramatic statements were easy compared to the months and years of patient effort required to truly change a corporate culture. But for the first time in her business career, Maya Blackwood felt like she was using her wealth and power for something that mattered beyond profit margins and market share. She was fighting for justice, dignity, and the basic human right to be treated fairly, regardless of race or appearance. And she was winning. 6 months after Flight 447 had landed in Miami, the reverberations of that single incident continued to reshape the airline industry. Maya Blackwood stood in her corner office 37 floors above downtown Miami, looking out at the airport where her transformation from victim to victor had begun. Elena Rodriguez entered with a thick folder of reports and a satisfied smile. Maya, I have the 6-month impact assessment you requested. The numbers are extraordinary. Maya turned from the window, her expression curious. Show me what real change looks like in data. Elena opened the folder revealing charts and graphs that told the story of corporate revolution. Discrimination complaints across the airline industry are down 62% from this time last year. 12 airlines have implemented zero-tolerance policies similar to ours. 3 federal laws have been passed strengthening passenger rights and criminalizing retaliation against civil rights complaints. And the human cost of those changes, Derek Morrison was sentenced to 18 months in federal prison for fraud and civil rights violations. Victoria Ashworth received 3 years and is currently serving time at Coleman Federal Correctional Complex. Both are banned from working in transportation industries for life. Maya nodded grimly. Prison time seems harsh for discrimination, but fraud and conspiracy charges carry serious penalties. What about the higher-level managers? Vice President Angela Davis received 5 years for racketeering related to the organized suppression of civil rights complaints. Regional Manager David Parker cooperated with investigators and received 2 years probation. HR Director Michelle Santos was terminated and blacklisted from HR positions in any federally regulated industry. Maya walked to her desk where photographs from the past 6 months chronicled a remarkable transformation. Pictures of congressional testimony meetings with civil rights leaders, awards ceremonies, and most importantly, letters from passengers whose lives had been changed by the reforms. Elena read me some of the passenger letters. I need to remember why we did this. Elena pulled out a stack of handwritten notes. This one is from Patricia Williams, a black nurse from Atlanta who was banned from flying for 2 years because she complained about being downgraded from first class. Miss Blackwood, you gave me back my right to travel to see my grandchildren. I can never thank you enough. Maya felt the familiar tightness in her chest that came with reading these letters. Continue. This is from James Park, a Korean-American businessman who was placed on a no-fly list after complaining about discriminatory treatment. I thought my career was over because I couldn't travel for work. Your reforms not only restored my ability to fly, but they gave my children faith that justice is possible in America. Maya sat down heavily, the weight of responsibility and satisfaction mixing in her chest. How many people have we been able to help with the no-fly list reviews? 237 passengers have been removed from wrongful no-fly lists across 7 airlines. Total compensation paid out exceeds $12 million. But more importantly, the Federal No-Fly List Reform Act now requires due process and appeals procedures for any travel restrictions. Elena walked to Maya's wall where a framed certificate hung among her business awards. The NAACP Transportation Justice Award she read aloud, for outstanding leadership in eliminating discrimination from commercial aviation. Maya smiled, remembering the ceremony where she'd been surrounded by civil rights leaders whose work she'd admired for years. The real heroes are people like Carlos Rivera, who found the courage to speak up despite being afraid for their jobs. Speaking of Carlos, his passenger advocacy program has been implemented by 43 airlines nationwide. He's been invited to testify before Congress next month about creating federal passenger advocate requirements. Maya pulled up Carlos's latest report on her computer. In 6 months, he had built a comprehensive structure for reporting and addressing discrimination that was becoming the gold standard for the industry. Carlos has processed over 800 discrimination complaints and resolved 94% of them to passenger satisfaction. 0 retaliation incidents reported. Elena sat down across from Maya's desk. Maya, there's something else. I've been monitoring social media sentiment about airline travel among minorities. The change is remarkable. She showed Maya her tablet displaying social media analytics. 6 months ago, 68% of Black and Hispanic travelers reported feeling anxious or unwelcome when flying. Today, that number is down to 21%. People are sharing stories of improved treatment, respectful service, and confidence that their complaints will be taken seriously. Maya studied the data with satisfaction. Real change isn't just about policy, it's about how people feel when they travel. If we've made flying less stressful for millions of passengers, then everything we've been through was worth it. There's more good news. Jennifer Thompson, the business executive who witnessed the original incident, has launched a nonprofit organization called Passenger Justice Watch. They monitor airline practices and advocate for travelers who experience discrimination. Maya remembered Jennifer's calm professionalism during the crisis, her willingness to testify and provide evidence. Has she been effective? Incredibly effective. They've documented and resolved over 300 cases of discriminatory treatment across all major airlines. Their oversight has become so respected that airlines proactively contact them to review new policies before implementation. Elena turned to a section of financial data. Maya, I know you said you didn't care about the financial implications, but you should know that our customer satisfaction scores are at all-time highs. Revenue is up 18%, and we've been ranked the #1 airline for passenger experience by 3 separate industry publications. Maya looked surprised. We're more profitable because we treat people fairly, dramatically more profitable. Turns out that passengers are willing to pay premium prices for airlines that guarantee dignified treatment. Our repeat customer rate is up 43%, and we've attracted customers from competitors who haven't implemented similar reforms. Maya walked back to the window, looking out at the steady stream of aircraft taking off and landing at Miami International. Have the competitors who resisted change suffered consequences? Elena's smile was sharp. 3 airlines that refused to implement reforms have faced federal investigations, multiple lawsuits, and significant customer defections. One regional carrier went bankrupt after a viral discrimination incident led to massive boycotts. The market punished discrimination more harshly than regulation ever could. Exactly. Passengers have options now, and they're choosing airlines that treat them with respect. Maya thought about Victoria Ashworth and Derek Morrison, whose moment of prejudice had triggered consequences they never could have imagined. Elena, have either Victoria or Derek attempted to contact us apologies requests for leniency? Elena shook her head. Derek Morrison's lawyer submitted a letter claiming his client was a scapegoat for institutional problems beyond his control. Victoria Ashworth has maintained her innocence throughout her incarceration, claiming she was simply following company policy. Maya felt no satisfaction in their downfall, but no regret either. They chose their actions, and actions have consequences. The passengers they mistreated deserved justice, Maya. There's one more thing. We received a request from the Smithsonian National Museum of African American History and Culture. They want to create an exhibit about the Flight 447 incident as a pivotal moment in civil rights history. Maya considered the request thoughtfully. What would the exhibit include? Artifacts from the flight videos of the press conferences, documentation of the industry changes that resulted, and interviews with passengers who witnessed the events. They're calling it Flying While Black, How One Flight Changed an Industry. Maya nodded slowly. Tell them yes, but with one condition. I want Carlos Rivera to be featured prominently as the real hero of this story. He's the one who had the moral courage to speak up when it mattered most. Elena made a note. I'll arrange that. Maya, do you ever regret how this all unfolded? The media attention, the investigations, the complete transformation of your company. Maya turned back to her desk where a letter from an 8-year-old girl sat in a frame. The child had written, Dear Miss Blackwood, my daddy says you made it safe for families like mine to fly on airplanes. Thank you for being brave. Elena, I regret that it took a public humiliation for me to discover what was happening in my own company. I regret that hundreds of passengers were mistreated before I took action. But I don't regret anything that happened after Flight 447 landed. Maya looked at the photograph on her desk of Carlos Rivera receiving a national award for ethical leadership. Every employee termination, every policy change, every federal investigation, every moment of public scrutiny, it was all necessary to create real change. Elena gathered her reports, preparing to leave. What's next, Maya? The foundation is fully operational, the reforms are working, the industry has changed. What's the next mountain to climb? Maya smiled, looking at her computer screen where emails from passengers around the world thanked her for making travel safer and more dignified. Elena, the next mountain is making sure this change is permanent. Corporate culture can shift back toward discrimination if we're not vigilant. Our job now is to ensure that what we built survives long after we're gone. As Elena left the office, Maya remained at her desk reading passenger letters and thinking about the legacy she was building. 6 months ago, she'd been a successful CEO focused primarily on profit and expansion. Today, she was a civil rights leader whose actions had changed an entire industry. The transformation hadn't been easy, but it had been necessary. And, for the first time in her business career, Maya Blackwood knew that her success would be measured not just in dollars, but in dignity. 1 year after Flight 447 had changed everything, Maya Blackwood stood before a joint session of Congress, preparing to deliver testimony that would cement her legacy as more than just a successful businesswoman. The packed chamber buzzed with anticipation as representatives, senators, and gallery observers awaited her words on the Transportation Equality Act landmark legislation that had emerged directly from her experience with airline discrimination. Chairwoman Williams. Ranking Member Johnson, distinguished members of Congress. Maya began her voice carrying the authority of someone who had transformed personal injustice into nationwide reform. I appear before you today not as a CEO, but as an American citizen who experienced discrimination and chose to fight back. She paused, looking out at the sea of faces that included many of the people whose lives had been changed by her actions. Carlos Rivera sat in the gallery now, director of the National Transportation Equality Commission. Jennifer Thompson was there representing Passenger Justice Watch. Miguel Santos had brought his children, who were now 12 and 10, old enough to understand the historic significant costs for travelers. How do you respond? Maya's smile was confident. Representative Chen, that argument assumes that discrimination was somehow economically beneficial. In reality, treating customers fairly has been incredibly profitable. Airlines implementing comprehensive equality policies have seen average revenue increases of 23% and customer retention rates that exceed industry standards by 40%. She turned to address the full chamber. When you create an environment where every passenger feels welcome and respected, you don't lose customers, you gain them. Families who were afraid to travel are now booking vacations. Business travelers who faced humiliation are now loyal customers. The moral case for equality is also the business case. Senator Robert Hayes from Texas, no relation to Captain Hayes, raised his hand. Miss Blackwood, what would you say to airline employees who claim that the new policies are too restrictive, that they limit their ability to make judgment calls about passenger behavior? Maya's expression grew serious. Senator Hayes' airline employees retain full authority to make legitimate safety and security decisions. What they've lost is the ability to make those decisions based on a passenger's race, clothing, accent, or appearance. If an employee can't distinguish between actual security concerns and personal prejudice, then they need additional training or a different career. She pulled out a tablet and referenced specific data. In the past year, airlines operating under the new protocols have experienced 0 security incidents related to the policy changes. Safety has improved, not declined, because employees are now focused on actual risk factors rather than superficial characteristics. Maya walked closer to the witness table, her voice growing more personal. Members of Congress, I want to share a letter I received last week from a young woman named Ashley Williams. She wrote, Miss Blackwood, 2 years ago I was kicked off a flight because the crew thought my insulin pump was suspicious. Last month I flew with my family for the first time since then. The flight attendant asked about my medical equipment. I explained it was for diabetes, and she offered to help me find the best place to store my supplies. I cried happy tears the entire flight. The chamber was completely silent as Maya continued reading. That letter represents thousands of similar stories. Passengers who were afraid to travel can now fly with confidence. Families can vacation together without fear of humiliation. Business travelers can focus on their work instead of worrying about discrimination. Maya set down the tablet and looked directly at the camera, broadcasting the session live. But this isn't just about airlines. The Transportation Equality Act addresses discrimination in all forms of commercial travel buses, trains, ride-sharing services, rental cars. If you're an American citizen with the money to buy a ticket, you deserve to be treated with dignity, regardless of what you look like. Representative Maria Santos from New York nodded approvingly. Miss Blackwood, how do we ensure that these reforms survive changes in administration shifts in corporate leadership or economic pressures? Representative Santos, that's exactly why federal legislation is necessary. Corporate policies can change with new management. Federal laws create permanent standards that transcend individual companies or executives. Maya's voice grew stronger. The Transportation Equality Act doesn't just prohibit discrimination. It creates enforcement mechanisms with real consequences. Companies that discriminate will face federal penalties. Employees who engage in racist behavior will be permanently banned from transportation industries. Maya turned to address a section of the gallery where airline executives sat uncomfortably. To the industry representatives here today, I want to be clear, this legislation is your opportunity to get ahead of a problem instead of being dragged behind it. Companies that embrace equality will thrive. Those that resist will face consequences that make my response to Flight 447 look gentle. Chairwoman Williams leaned forward. Ms. Blackwood, in your testimony, you focused primarily on the business and policy arguments for transportation equality. Could you speak to the personal impact this experience has had on you? Maya paused, her composed facade softening slightly. Chairwoman Williams, a year ago, I thought success meant building a profitable company and accumulating wealth. What I learned on Flight 447 is that real success means using your power to protect people who can't protect themselves. She gestured toward Carlos Rivera in the gallery. Success means promoting employees like Carlos Rivera, who have moral courage over those who simply follow orders. Success means creating structures where speaking up for justice is rewarded instead of punished. Maya's voice grew emotional. I've received thousands of letters from passengers whose travel experiences have been transformed by these reforms. But the letter that means the most to me is from a 10-year-old girl whose family can now visit relatives across the country without fear of discrimination. She wrote, "Thank you for making sure my little brother and I can fly on airplanes without grown-ups being mean to us." The chamber erupted in spontaneous applause. Maya waited for it to subside before delivering her closing statement. Members of Congress, the Transportation Equality Act isn't just legislation, it's a declaration that America means what it says about equality and justice for all. When we allow discrimination in transportation, we're telling millions of Americans that their citizenship is conditional, that their dignity is negotiable, that their right to travel freely depends on someone else's prejudices. Maya walked back toward the witness table, her final words ringing through the chamber. 1 year ago, I was humiliated by employees at my own company because they decided I didn't belong in first class. Today, I'm testifying before Congress about legislation that will prevent that humiliation from happening to anyone else. She looked directly into the cameras again. To every person watching who has ever been judged by their appearance, dismissed because of their race, or made to feel like they don't belong, this is for you. Your dignity is non-negotiable. Your right to fair treatment is guaranteed, and there are people fighting every day to make sure those rights are protected. As Maya concluded her testimony and walked away from the witness table, the chamber erupted in sustained applause. The Transportation Equality Act would pass both houses of Congress within 2 weeks, creating the strongest passenger protection laws in American history. But Maya's real legacy wasn't in legislation or corporate policies. It was in the millions of passengers who could now travel without fear, in employees like Carlos, who had learned that moral courage was rewarded, and in children who would grow up in a world where discrimination in transportation was not just wrong, it was illegal. Flight 447 had lasted 3 hours and 17 minutes. Its impact would last forever. Change happens when silence ends. Maya Blackwood's words echoed across social media platforms in congressional hearings and in airport terminals around the world. But perhaps most importantly, they echoed in the hearts and minds of ordinary passengers who had learned that their voices mattered, that their dignity was worth fighting for, and that injustice could be defeated by people willing to stand up and speak truth. The story of Flight 447 became more than just a viral moment or a corporate scandal. It became proof that individual actions could trigger widespread change, that moral courage could overcome institutional prejudice, and that justice delayed didn't have to mean justice denied. Carlos Rivera, now a nationally recognized expert on transportation equality, often spoke to airline employees about the moment that changed his life. I was afraid to speak up because I thought I'd lose my job, he would tell them. What I learned is that staying silent costs so much more than speaking up ever could. When you see injustice, you have to choose whether you're going to be part of the problem or part of the solution. Jennifer Thompson's Passenger Justice Watch had grown into a powerful advocacy organization with chapters in 43 states. Her message was simple: everyone deserves to travel with dignity. If you experience discrimination, document it, report it, and don't let anyone convince you that you're being too sensitive. Your experience matters. The children who had witnessed the events on Flight 447 now, young teenagers, carried those lessons into their daily lives. Miguel Santos's daughter would later write in a high school essay, "I learned that day that standing up for what's right isn't just about helping yourself. It's about helping everyone who comes after you." For Maya, Blackwood's success was now measured differently. The Blackwood Foundation for Transportation Equality had helped thousands of passengers resolve discrimination complaints and had funded civil rights training programs at airports across the country. But her greatest satisfaction came from letters like the one she received from a young black pilot who wrote, "Miss Blackwood, because of what you did, I knew I could become a pilot without fear of how I'd be treated. Thank you for making the sky safe for people like us." If you've ever been judged by your appearance, dismissed because of your race, or made to feel like you don't belong, this story was for you. If you've ever witnessed discrimination and wondered whether speaking up would make a difference, remember Flight 447. If you've ever thought that one person can't change an entire industry, remember that Maya Blackwood started with nothing more than the courage to insist on being treated fairly. Your voice matters. Your dignity is non-negotiable. And sometimes standing up for yourself means standing up for everyone who comes after you. Have you ever experienced discrimination while traveling? Share your story in the comments below. Your experiences help us understand how common these problems are and remind others that they're not alone. If this story inspired you to believe that change is possible, if it showed you that one person really can make a difference, then hit that like button right now. Your like helps this story reach more people who need to hear it. And please subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell. We share stories of justice, courage, and standing up for what's right every single week. When you subscribe, you're joining a community of people who believe that respect and dignity aren't luxuries, they're rights that belong to every human being. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Post it on your social media. Send it to your friends and family. Because real change happens when people refuse to stay silent, when they choose justice over comfort, and when they remember that equality isn't a privilege, it's a right that belongs to every single one of us. Thanks for watching, and remember, stand up, speak out, change the world.